You're listening to Nutrition Matters Podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist.
Hi everyone, it's Paige Smathers. Thanks so much for being here. Nutrition Matters Podcast explores what really matters in nutrition and health with a sensitive and realistic approach. To help support the podcast, please consider making a donation at positive-nutrition.com/podcast. If you find this episode interesting, engaging, or helpful in your life, please consider donating, sharing with friends and family, and leaving a review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever podcast app you use to listen to this podcast. You can leave a review about this podcast straight from your podcast app. Search Nutrition Matters Podcast, click reviews, and then write a review. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought. Thank you for listening. Welcome to Nutrition Matters Podcast. My name is Paige Smathers, and I'm so excited you're here. Today, I'm going to be talking about lots of different things with my guest, Jessi Hoffman. So, Jessi's going to introduce herself in the podcast episode, but just to kind of help you get to know her a little bit, Jessi's been working with me as my intern over the last probably more than half the year. And she is just so fabulous. And together we decided that it was time to build a course all about the science and the art of nutrition, but without the gimmicks. So Jessi and I both see a lot of people talking about how to heal your relationship with food, how to embrace intuitive eating, how to embrace your body and to work on body positivity. And while all that stuff is super, super important, I just wasn't seeing a lot of courses or resources or materials about the science of nutrition. Now, a lot of people will say, you can't really talk about nutrition until you've done all the other steps of intuitive eating and principles so that you've worked up to this place where now you're able to apply gentle nutrition. Well, I totally agree with that. I think it's also really interesting to think about how for many, learning about the science of nutrition can be really, really helpful to walk away from the dieting mentality, because you can just see through the red flags and the BS that's out there about nutrition and about diets. So I think that this material that we've put together in this brand new course is really accessible and helpful long-term to be able to kind of wade through science, fact versus fiction. So this course is 12 lessons long. We talk about why diets don't work. We talk about the science of metabolism, macro and micronutrients, the gut health, microbiome, a whole conversation that Jessi really specializes in. We bust lots of common nutrition myths. We talk about the science of nutrition research, so understanding how research is actually done and how to then be able to be a critical consumer of the science that comes out. We talk about more practical aspects of the science and art of nutrition, like meal planning, grocery shopping, and then the last 3 lessons of the course are exercise, normal eating, and then applying the knowledge to practice, where we talk a lot about mindfulness and really kind of the art of nutrition. So I'm so excited about this course. I'm super proud of it. It is all Health at Every Size aligned. It's all in alignment with the work that I do and what I feel is ethical and realistic and practically helpful. And we are actually offering a kind of limited time offer. We're offering $50 off, and the course normally runs at $250. So for the next week or so, actually a little less than a week, we're offering the course at $200. So if you want to get $50 off at checkout, put in the code Nutrition Matters at checkout. So you can access this course via the website positive-nutrition.com. Click on Academy at the top. It's in the menu. Or you can go directly there by going to academy.positive-nutrition.com. There's a lot to remember there, but it will be in the show notes as well. So if you're interested in checking it out, we are so excited to offer this. This is perfect for anyone who feels like they've done a lot of work with intuitive eating and they're ready for that gentle nutrition side of things. This is also really good for anyone who's just like, you know what, I just want to understand like more about the science, because I feel like I'm hearing this one thing said this place and a completely opposite claim being made in another place, and it can all feel really confusing. So what I love about this course is Jessi, who's again the guest on this podcast episode, she's super sciencey. She has this really incredible scientific mind. And so she brings so much great science background to this course. And then what I think I offer is I offer this sort of practical perspective because I do this stuff and talk about this stuff all the time in session with my clients. I'm able to offer this more practical side where it's like, okay, and this is how you apply this, or this is how you can think about it to not get tripped up, or this is how this can be helpful in your everyday life. So check out the course, positive-nutrition.com, click on Academy, or go directly there, academy.positive-nutrition.com, and be sure to type in Nutrition Matters at checkout to get $50 off. Okay, so more about this podcast episode. Now you'll notice that I have the hashtag Nuance Matters in the title of this podcast episode. So for those of you who have been following me on Instagram for a little bit, you might already know what this is. But if anyone's new to this, or if you don't follow me there, you might be kind of confused what that is. So a couple months ago, I had this idea that exploring nuance with nutrition, with health at every size, with intuitive eating, with recovery, with eating, with self-care is just such a critical lens to view all of this stuff through, in my opinion. I think nuance and a nuanced perspective and a nuanced mindset is such an important thing when it comes to, navigating nutrition science or navigating your relationship with food, or even trying to figure out how to continually progress and move forward and to take good care of yourself. Looking at life through the lens of nuance is such a critical part of being happy and healthy. So I'm kind of on this mission to explore nuance whenever I can, and to kind of say, wait a minute, let's look at we're looking at that in a really kind of all or nothing perspective. Let's really look at this with messiness and through the lens of nuance. And to me, this is a really important thing that has been helpful for me personally in my life, but also professionally as well. So you might have heard throughout the last few episodes on the podcast, I've talked about nuance quite a bit, and it's going to continue on. I think nuance is something that I just kind of feel called to talk about, called to kind of bring up, and called to have discussions around. Hopefully you find it helpful as well. So today in the podcast, we are talking about the nuance of nutrition science and of nutrition and of gut health specifically. Jessi specializes in gut health. So you're going to love this. You're going to learn a lot. I'm super excited to share this with you. So if you're interested and you have an Instagram account, you want to follow along, you can follow the hashtag Nuance Matters. Obviously, follow me at Paige Smathers RD, or even Jessi Hoffman. It's Jessi with an IE __ Hoffman HOFFMAN. So with that, let me just say a couple more things. One more thing to say is reviews are always appreciated. Thank you so much to those of you who have done that. If you have a minute to hop on iTunes, leave a quick review. That is super, super helpful. So thank you to those of you who have done that. And if you haven't, take a minute to do it if you would. As always, join the Facebook group if you want to continue the conversation on outside of the podcast. Just search Nutrition Matters Podcast Community on Facebook. And as always, if you want to leave a small donation to kind of help keep this project running, that's always appreciated. And I just like to kind of mention that I put all of the donations I get for the podcast, which, by the way, it's not very much, but just a little bit. I put those into a separate account where I use that money to pay for my continuing education, which is helpful in me making connections with other professionals to be on the podcast, but also is really helpful in me staying sharp on my nutrition knowledge and my knowledge about the field of nutrition and self-care and all the things we talk about here. So with that extremely long introduction, I am so excited to bring you this podcast episode with Jessi Hoffman. And be sure to check out the course to see if it might be a good fit for you. Again, at academy.positive-nutrition.com. All right, let's get into the podcast episode. Hi, Jessi. Welcome to Nutrition Matters Podcast.
Hey, Paige. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I know. It's like finally, right? We've been
forever.
This has been a long time in the making. So some of my listeners will already kind of know who you are, but just take a minute and talk about who you are kind of briefly, and then we'll dive into some of the more specific elements of your story, and and then we'll get going with things.
All right. So currently I am a PhD student at the University of Kentucky studying nutritional science. I have my master's in nutrition from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and I'm currently doing research based really on the effects of environmental pollutants on the gut microbiome and the way in which nutrition can kind of modulate that. So that's where I am now. And a little tidbit, my husband's also in the same PhD program with me, and we're both should be finishing within the next few months. So that's exciting.
Yay. And what's the plan after you're done with your programs? Any idea?
Not really. For me, I am going to do a dietetic internship, so that's utmost priority for me. For him, it's to get a job. So we're kind of in limbo right now, trying to figure out where we're going to move, what we're going to do. Yeah. So
and by the time this gets released, maybe you'll already know by the time this gets released. You might have more details in line.
That's very true.
Well, congrats. This is so exciting, such a huge end to so many decades of school. How does that feel?
Oh my gosh. I sat there and I will have officially been in college for probably 10 years by the time I finish. So that it's been an endeavor.
Yeah.
And you learn so much along the way about things that you didn't have to do and things that, I don't know, it's all a learning experience, and I don't think I would go back and change it, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And so Jessi has been working with me for the last probably at least half a year, and we've done a lot of projects together. And I've just been so grateful for you, Jessi, all your help. You're such a brilliant researcher and just so organized and such a good critical thinker. I've just loved having you as part of my team. So thanks for all your efforts with me. So we wanted to record this podcast to kind of highlight you and your work and your story, and then also to highlight something really fun that you and I have been working on together. So that's kind of a basic outline of what we'll be talking about today. So let's go ahead, Jessi, and just talk really kind of broadly, starting off a little bit about your maybe interest in nutrition. What brought you into the field of nutritional science?
All right. So I've really always had kind of a sciencey mindset growing up. I was always that kid that questioned everything. And my parents were really good in fostering kind of that creativity and that curiosity. My mom is a speech therapist by training, but she actually taught when I was in elementary school. She switched over and taught science lab as it was kind of like a extracurricular kind of thing. And so I really got interested in science when she started teaching that, because she's really fun and she's really fun to learn like science from. So my interest in nutrition actually kind of started for the wrong reasons. And during my junior year of high school, I was always really incredibly active. I played soccer and things like that. But I just started getting a little self-conscious towards the end of my junior year in high school. And I made the conscious effort to start, quote unquote, eating healthier. So I was driving now. I had a job. I was maybe stopping too often at picking up fast food and not eating regular meals at home with the family. So I just really made a conscious effort to change a little bit of those habits, and just really based on my personality. I'm very type A, very perfectionistic. So you can probably guess that quickly spiraled out of control. I was working really long hours over the summer as a lifeguard, commuting back and forth from work 30 minutes both ways. And I guess it was just a lot for between my junior and senior year, and things just really kind of spiraled out of control. And soon enough, I was in full blown anorexia. So my parents were really unsure of what to do at that point. And luckily, my grandmother really stepped up and was just like, this is a problem. Something needs to happen. And so after that, they quickly got me in treatment and things. Luckily, I got in treatment pretty early, and I was able to get the help I needed and get out of that pretty quickly. So I'm very thankful for my parents being able to intervene and things like that. But my story is just, I find that my story is a little different because I hear a lot of people talk about how they grew up with dieting and, that being very prevalent in their household and things like that. But I've never been exposed to really any of that. My mom never dieted. My parents never said anything negative about bodies. It wasn't really a topic. My mom honestly is like the perfect, like, intuitive eater. She from like ever since I can remember, she's very in tune to her hunger and fullness cues. She is very relaxed with food. She enjoys it, but it's not, a constant focus. And so I really grew up in a really healthy food environment. But I really think that my kind of genetics and predisposition to very high anxiety and perfectionistic tendencies is really what kind of spiraled me out of control pretty quickly.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I'm always so curious for people who study nutrition and who kind of have come into that world with some issues around body image or food or things like that. First of all, side note, who doesn't come into it with those issues, right? Yeah. We're all steeped in this culture, and we're all to one degree or another probably on the spectrum of having some of these issues. But I'm always curious to hear, now that you're nearing the end of your career in academia, or maybe you're going to continue, who knows, but just in terms of schooling, tell me about, do you think that learning about nutrition was helpful to you or harmful to you? And I know that that's kind of a binary way of asking that question, but kind of talk about what that process was like for you.
So I really think you have to be in a healthy mindset in order to approach nutrition. If you have had past issues with food or, an eating disorder or something like that. So I went into undergrad as a biology major, actually pre-vet, but that was basically biology. And then I switched back and forth from, pre-vet to biology education, but it was always in the realm of science. And I always still had that interest in nutrition, but I don't think it was the time for me to get into it at that point. I don't think I was, fully out of the woods yet in order to be able to dive back into nutrition. So, my junior year of college, undergrad, I really kind of made the decision that I really wanted to go to grad school and I really wanted to go for nutrition. And so that was a conversation I had to have with my family and be like, I have the right intentions with this. This is coming from a healthy mindset. But I could definitely see that, if you are still in the weeds of an eating disorder or having issues with food, it could really exacerbate things really quickly because there's just so much information and things out there. But coming from it, having gone through master's and now almost my entire PhD study in nutrition, I've really found that it's made my relationship with food stronger and better as I've learned more and more about, the way our bodies work and the way our bodies metabolize different foods and things like that. And Paige and I have talked about this a lot, but the research is just really strong against dieting not working and restricting foods not working. And so that is really kind of a breath of fresh air. And I think that's really helpful in kind of making me realize, continually realize that fueling our bodies properly is incredibly important.
Yeah, but you're right. You kind of have to be in that right mindset for nutrition knowledge to be helpful, because taken out of context or taken in sort of a rigid, obsessive, extreme way, especially out of context or especially sort of like zoomed in on the minute detail while forgetting kind of the big picture, that can be really damaging. So yeah, nutrition is an interesting thing. In my experience, learning about it was so helpful to relax about nutrition. One of the big reasons I wanted to learn about nutrition is because I wanted to learn, the quote truth, and I wanted to learn the quote perfect way to eat. And then as I started learning about nutrition, I realized, oh, that stuff doesn't even exist. And like, maybe that's that assumption that there is a perfect way to eat is actually what's harming me. So for me, learning about nutrition and the science behind it, and like how our bodies metabolize things, and how like the physiology of eating works was so helpful for me. But I know for others, it can kind of send you further into your disorder or into your struggle. So there's definitely not one way this turns out, but I'm always interested to hear from people about their experience.
And it also really depends on your, teachers and the environment at school you're in, which is obviously going to vary from school to school. My undergrad, they didn't have a nutrition program because we had maybe 1,500 students in the entire school. So biology was pretty much as nutrition-y as you got. But during my master's in nutrition, the environment there was just so positive. None of it was diety at all. All the information was very science-based and not gimmicky and things like that. And that's continued throughout my PhD, how, everything's very science-based and you don't really talk about diets. So I guess that's kind of a misconception that some people have when they hear I study about nutrition. They automatically assume I'm studying about diets, or, I am studying about diets in the sense of the foods that we consume are our diet from a perspective of,
the true meaning of the word.
Yeah, that's the way we talk about it in nutrition. So it's really tricky, when people use the word diet, I'm like, well, diet is technically anything you eat.
Right, right. But fad diet.
Yeah, they think I study like fad diets. So like, what should I eat?
Paleo. Yeah. Should I eat this way? Should I eat that way? Should I follow this plan? Don't you just kind of want to tell people you don't study this? Sometimes it's like, I'm a hairdresser, like, I don't want to get those questions.
Yeah. And then I think I've even told you about this before. I've encountered people in like checkout lines and things like that who find that out. And then they ask me why I'm buying certain foods. And I'm like, just leave me alone. Like,
so hard. I'm sure every profession has that element. Like, I have a neighbor who's an OBGYN, and she tells me that the minute she tells people that, all of a sudden they're like telling her horror stories about childbirth and like showing them their like boobs and being like, hey, like, what do you think? And she's just like, oh my gosh, like, no, I'm not at work and I'm not your doctor. And like, I don't want to hear these stories. So maybe just, I don't know. It's made me think more about how I talk to other people about their work, and just kind of thinking, okay, what do they usually probably hear as far as questions, and how can I just be interested without being annoying?
Yeah.
It's a funny thing.
The crazy thing about nutrition, though, is because it's so tangible in a sense. Everybody has their, Google degree in nutrition, and they think they're the experts, So that's something that I've also encountered, is the idea that the field that I study is not. I've encountered this from other fields, like other PhD, students, maybe in things like biochemistry and like really what you think of as like hard science, kind of look down upon nutritional science and like, oh, you just study food, kind of things like that.
Oh, you're not as hardcore as we are.
Oh yeah. We get,
because there has to be tribalism no matter where you go. There has to be an us versus them. There has to be a like hard science and soft science. I mean, we put up these. I mean, this goes along with the theme of what we'll talk about today. We put up these binaries no matter where we are. And that us versus them mentality, or that like right, wrong, good, bad mentality is everywhere. That's really fascinating. I'm not in like the science world, so to speak. So I don't really interact a ton with people doing biochemistry research or whatever, but that's interesting to know that that's the perspective. Kind of weird.
We really just study different things. They study very detailed molecular mechanisms, and we study more of like whole body issues and things like that. And they're equally as important. And I think it's important to realize that, we all do different things, but they all are contributing to one main goal. And that's really better understanding the human body and human health and things like that.
Right. So, Jessi, you study the gut, and this is a hot topic. And I think this is actually how you found me. Am I right? You listened to a podcast I did about gut health with Marcy Evans. Is that right?
Yeah. I was actually looking up podcasts on just like gut health and things like that. And yours is one of the first that pops up. And I was like, oh, this looks interesting. These are RDs. And so I listened and immediately was a lifelong listener after that.
And that's where our love story began. I love it. So, so talk a little bit about gut health generally. I mean, I know that that's a big question, but what are some of the most common misconceptions you hear? What do you wish people knew? Let's dive into some of that stuff, because I think it's just a fascinating topic.
All right. So there's tons of there's a big hype around gut health right now. It's very hot, and it's almost like, I almost want to claim it as like the new fad diet, because people are all developing these diets to kind of, better your quote unquote gut health and things like that. But people really, even in the science, we are just beginning to kind of get into understanding how gut health influences overall health. And but I think what happens is industry really sees that, the science is finding new and interesting avenues of research, and they're like, we could make really good money off of this. And then they dive into that, and then it becomes this huge fad. So the first kind of thing I want to cover is, we don't know like as much as the media portrays that we do know. Especially when it comes to like the gut microbiome and things like that. The media quickly grabbed on to, people studying and finding links between certain gut microbes and like things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes and things like that. And to point out, like, those are all associative like research. And the media really grabs onto that, and industry really grabs onto that, and is like, okay, well, this is a really good avenue. People are excited about this. What can we do? And so that's where this whole, I think the whole industry and, they just grabbed onto this idea that we can profit off of gut promoting products, kind of things like that. So that's a big misconception, is that,
well, and that's a common thing that diets or fad diets do, is take real true science and kind of twist it and take it out of context and blow it out of proportion, and then repackage it as a product where, like, gut health isn't you can't sell a product to lead to gut health. Gut health is what you're doing over time, also what your environment looks like, also what your lifestyle looks like, also what your genetics are, right? There's so many factors. You can't just like take a pill or a drink and say, okay, good, I've got that going on, right?
Yeah. And so you kind of brought it up, but that's like one of the biggest misconceptions, is that gut issues are all dietary related. So people will then go on all these elimination diets to remove things, when the issue is not, even if you have this like gut issue, the issue is often not your diet. There's so many things that affect gut health. You have genetics, you have your environment, which is what I study. Part of that really affects your gut health, and we're just beginning to learn about that. Your immune system, 80% of your immune system resides in your gut. So it's not uncommon for people with autoimmune issues or, even immune deficits to have gut problems. So when we're just focusing on elimination diets and, diagnosing gut issues with only this kind of dietary tag, we're really ignoring the other, issues that play into that.
And not to mention the fact that if someone's concerned about their gut health and then they cut a bunch of things out, that actually more likely is going to cause more issues, because your gut, you want to just take a minute and talk about like how important variety and getting all different types of food is for gut health?
I mean, yeah, that's variety, and consuming, this diverse diet is really incredibly important for gut health and overall health. So, I mean, we all know that different types of foods have different vitamins and minerals, but also different types of foods nourish our gut bacteria differently. So our gut bacteria are actually able to metabolize certain dietary components that either we can't metabolize ourselves, or that are kind of left over that, maybe weren't all absorbed. So that even includes things like proteins and polyphenols and, bioactive components like that, as well as what we commonly think of as being metabolized by the gut microbes is fiber. So fiber is definitely, it passes through the digestive system untouched by our mammalian enzymes. So it, reaches the large intestine, and that's where it's really fermented is what we call it by the gut microbes, where they are able to cleave some of those bonds that we can't, and then we absorb the metabolites that the gut microbes produce, and then they're able to thrive as well. So the interesting thing about the microbes that live in our gut is they are incredibly diverse as well. They all prefer different nutrients, and they all feed off of different nutrients, and they, produce metabolites that then the other microbes there may be able to feed off of the metabolites that one produce, things like that. So it's really a unique kind of synergistic environment. And if you are eliminating food groups, you're eliminating some of those nutrients that the gut microbes need to thrive. So you're essentially then eliminating certain groups of microbes from your gut, which is reducing what we call diversity in your gut, which is incredibly important. Diversity is one of the first things we look at when we kind of quote unquote look at gut health. What is your microbial signature in your gut? Do you have a lot of different bugs there? We look for what's called richness and evenness, which just is really what encompasses that diversity.
Right. So just to highlight what you're saying, it like people have the best intentions, but often what they hear is, oh, if you want to be so healthy, and if you want to have good gut health, you need to eat this food and this food, but don't eat that food. That food's bad for gut health. That food's bad for cancer prevention. That food's, but whatever we hear along the lines. And honestly, side note, if you spend long enough on the internet, you could find a reason to feel afraid of any food and every food, right?
Yeah.
There's something villainizing every food out there. So
side note, that was what really, that kind of exacerbated my issues early on. Was I was reading, things online and all these magazines that would tell you to eat one way, and then there would be one that tell you to eat the other way.
Right.
And my mom even noticed this. She was like, they're all telling you something different. You're not going to have anything to eat after you follow all of these rules. So
exactly. Well, and there's no way to win that game, right?
No.
At some point you're like, okay, all my rules contradict each other. And my personality is to try to play by the rules and to try to, be an A+ student, so to speak, but there's no way to win when your rules contradict, right? So
exactly
what ends up happening for people is with really good intentions here, but they end up only eating very few amounts of food in the name of health, quote unquote. And then as a result, they're less healthy for it. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the things that I just think we have so wrong about our perception of health, and specifically gut health in our current culture and our current environment, is we think, oh, I'm going to just eat these foods so that I can be so healthy. And yet that actually ends up detracting from your health. It's good to have a wide variety of foods, including things like cake and pasta and tortillas and vegetables and, chicken and fish and red meat and plant-based foods. Your body likes to get all of that, as much variety as possible on so many different levels, including gut health, but also including psychologically. It's nice to not feel like you're eating the same things all the time. It feels more sustainable and realistic to continue eating a wide variety of foods rather than just a certain amount of foods. It's socially helpful so that you're able to show up at a social gathering and just say, okay, whatever's here, I'll be able to have. And if I really do have a restriction that I need to follow for whatever reason, I can make it work. It doesn't need to run my life, and I don't need to stay home and not be social because of this allergy or this condition or whatever. So variety is so important when it comes to nutrition. And I think our current world is just almost anti-variety. No, we need restriction. We need rules. We need to stay in these certain boundaries. And if we break out of them, we'll be out of control. And I think we've just got it so backwards there on so many levels.
We just really overcomplicate so many things. We just have to, it's almost like we want someone to just tell us what to do when you are the operator of your own body. So you really need to figure out what you enjoy, what works best for you, things like that. There's so much individual variation, and what works for one person doesn't work for the other person. And it's just trying to pigeonhole rules and create these rigid guidelines of how we should and shouldn't eat is just not, it's not science-based, number one, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, on any level.
No.
And so often we think about health as what we put in our mouth, but we don't think about health as what's going on in our heads and what's going on in our relationships and what's going on with our sleep and our stress and all these other elements of what makes us feel whole and well. And so it's important, definitely important to talk about nutrition. Obviously, you and I both care about this. We both dedicated our careers to this topic and to this area. But I think when it's put in its proper context, it can be life enhancing and it can be interesting, but it doesn't need to be rigid and obsessive and punitive.
Exactly. And I think when you're really studying nutrition and things like that, you learn that there's no way it can be rigid, and there's no way we can say eat this one way. It's not, the research doesn't show that.
Totally. Okay. So Jessi, let's talk a little bit about probiotics. People love this topic right now.
Yeah. So that's one of the big things that I think the media and, supplement industry really grabbed a hold of. And so side note, the supplement industry is in the business of making money. They're not in the business of bettering your health. So their goal is to really make money. And so probiotics are supplements, and we have to remember that supplements aren't regulated by the FDA. So you can't be sure that what the bottle says is in there is what you're actually getting. But the research on probiotics is mixed, and I don't believe, based on my own experience, we're at the level of being able to say that you need to take this probiotic and this will help your gut health. So all of the...
Right, because there's I don't know what number, but millions, I don't know, millions of strains, right? So
yeah.
There's no possible way at this point in where we are with the research to be able to say, almost from a medicine standpoint, oh, you have this issue, this particular strain is what you should take for this issue. That connection is not there.
Yeah, and this is really for the main public, people without serious gut issues. So there has been research that on people with things like ulcerative colitis and irritable bowel syndrome, where certain probiotics have been beneficial in helping them kind of restore what we call a normal gut bacterial environment, restore a layer of mucus on your gut and gut intestine, which helps prevent pathogens from entering circulation and things like that. But those have only been studied in really serious cases. And the probiotic they're using is one that's called VSL number 3. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it's actually prescription based. So to kind of give you a perspective, I think VSL number 3 dosage can go up to 900 billion CFUs, which the most you will see on a shelf that you can buy in the store is 100 billion. So those have been the only ones that
Define what a CFU is, Jessi.
So it's called a colony forming unit, and it's basically just a measure of the amount of bacteria that are there. And then they kind of, from my understanding, they extrapolate it based on what they anticipate will be able to survive and actually inhabit the intestine. But that brings
Isn't there evidence that they don't need to survive all the way down to the large intestine for them to be effective?
Yeah, there's newer evidence that comes out that actually dead bacteria can actually confer a benefit as well.
Right.
That's still more new, and we're still trying to figure out what exactly. So it's something that the bacteria have in their cell wall. That's most likely. So it's most likely, from my perspective, I think it's stimulating some sort of immune response in the gut. That's then, having some sort of benefit. But that's still unknown at what these bacteria are really doing. Yeah. But the whole thing I really want to get at is that you have trillions of bacteria that live in your gut. So if you go on the shelves at your grocery store, your supplement store, like I said, the highest you're really going to find is 100 billion, and you're going to be paying a lot of money for that 100 billion bacteria, or CFUs is what they call it. If you think of 100 billion versus a trillion, that's like a drop in the bucket. So
I can't even fathom those numbers. So that's helpful for you to say it's a drop in the bucket, because for me it's they're both huge.
They're both huge, but it's very small compared to the amount that are there. And so I've really spent the last 2 or 3 years of my PhD research studying really detailed microbial mechanisms, really hardcore microbiology. And these bacteria are really unique. and that they have to have certain things to thrive, and then that they feed off of each other. And when you think of your gut, it's an ecosystem. They're all in, it's survival of the fittest, kind of things like that. They're all competing to live there. So you throwing in 100 billion of bacteria, and not all of those will make it to the large intestine. Some of them will, and even if they take up house and inhabit and are able to flourish somewhat, most likely they're not going to stay there for very long because they will be outcompeted. So that those bacteria that you're adding will have already had to essentially be in your gut at a large proportion for you to even be making any sort of benefit. And I still at that point don't think you're really going to contribute to shifting really the ecosystem that's in your gut. Okay. I feel like in order to do that, it's potential that you could you'd be taking multiple pills every day consistently, and most likely for the rest of your life, because there's not really strong evidence that you can permanently shift your gut microbial populations. Everyone seems to have what we call a core microbiome that you like to revert back to. So even if you're making these little changes by taking a probiotic, most likely the second you stop taking it, you're going to just revert back to what your normal microbiome is.
Okay, and so there's a lot of really interesting things coming out about that talk about things like fecal transplant. Do you have expertise in that? Do you want to talk about that at all?
I don't personally have expertise.
No. I just mean, do you feel comfortable talking about that?
Yeah. So fecal transplantation, so we call it FMT, so fecal microbiota transplantation. That's actually been really helpful in certain disease states. I don't think it's really recommended for the just normal individual.
Well, actually, just FYI, when I worked in the hospital setting on the bone marrow transplant floor, they did that.
Yeah, it's
C. diff.
That's what I was going to say. It's become a really common practice, and it's actually pretty one of our best defenses for combating C. diff. So if you're unfamiliar, C. diff is Clostridium difficile, which apparently just got its name changed, but it'll still be C. diff. So it's not Clostridium anymore, but it's something. It'll still,
Fun fact. Okay.
It'll still be C. diff, so everybody can just still call it C. diff. But that's what we see that occurs when people are in the hospital for certain conditions and they're put on antibiotics. Most people have this bacterium living inside of them at all times. The problem is when you take antibiotics, you knock out all those other bacteria, and because it's an ecosystem, that C. diff sees it as an opportunity to thrive because it was able to survive those antibiotics. So it really flourishes, and then you have diarrhea and things like that, really bad outcomes, and it can actually be deadly for some populations. So FMT has been really, it's probably currently the gold standard in treating those cases, just because it's really just taking the quote unquote healthy microbiome from an individual and literally transplanting it into their large intestine and letting those bacteria thrive.
It's literally like putting someone else's poop in your colon, right?
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Just let's just use easy words to understand here. Yep. No, that's so fascinating. There's also been some things that I've read up on about how they've tested that out in mice and seen some differences and even moods and things like that. So there's some fascinating implications about this really kind of bizarre treatment that we should all keep our eyes out for.
Yeah, it's new and somewhat new, and it has the potential to really impact and really be helpful if you can get over, that aspect and be able to just, stomach that, I guess, in a sense.
Stomach that, no pun intended.
So they do make, I think the most common method is transplanting it directly in the colon, but they do make poop pills. So
that is nasty.
Yeah,
that is so nasty. Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. All right, side note.
I can't work in my field without wanting to talk about poop.
Yeah, you can't talk about food without talking about poop. Sorry, everybody listening. So I just need to tell everyone how great you are, Jessi. The other day, I was hanging out with my little sisters, and they were asking me why does your pee smell when you eat asparagus? And so I just texted Jessi like, hey, do you know what the mechanism is? I don't get it, because it almost happens like immediately after you eat it, which makes no sense to me from what I understand about digestion, how digestion works.
Yeah.
And Jessi responds with like this paragraph, like, here's my hypothesis, and like, here's the study I could find on this. She's just the best. Do you guys see why I love her? I'm sure you do.
Well, you piqued my interest too, because I'm like, that's really true. I was like, I've read about why this happens, but I really want to know why now.
Yeah, like why so quick after you eat it? So what is your theory? Because I'm sure people are wondering.
So basically, there's numerous different compounds in in asparagus that you eat. And so a lot of them are water-based. So they will pass through the kind of urinary digestion more quickly than, intestinal digestion, so to speak. But the compounds are what we call very volatile. So they're very light and kind of airy, and they'll move really quickly. So that's my hypothesis, is that, it's quickly eliminated, whether it's absorbed into the bloodstream first and then it's eliminated, or it has to get, through the stomach and things like that. That's a question.
Maybe like as you're chewing it, like something gets absorbed in your tongue, like under your tongue or something.
I mean, yeah, that's very possible. But then there was some other, I forget. I've had the 23andMe genetic testing done, and it tells me that I'm likely to detect the smell of asparagus. So apparently there's a genetic component.
So some people can't smell it, or some people don't make smelly pee.
No, it's what they're saying is some people can't smell it.
Oh.
Yeah. So
all right, listeners, if you are someone who cannot smell asparagus pee, send me an email, because I want to know, because everyone I know can smell it.
Yeah. Maybe I think it's more common for people to be able to smell it than not.
Okay. All right. I'm interested. I love it. Nutrition is fascinating.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about gut health, Jessi? I mean, I know that it's like, okay, how many years do you have to talk about it? But any other misconceptions you want to hit on, or things you wish people knew about gut health specifically?
So kind of going back to the idea of we don't know enough to be prescribing people to do specific diets or even taking specific probiotics. I just really want to highlight that. And, in science, you have to be able to accept that what you believe at one point in time may be wrong in the future. So I'm not saying that that probiotics are all bad and that nobody needs to be taking them. They're likely not going to, hurt you. But they're also most likely not going to be helpful, and you'll just be wasting money. But that's at the current moment, and science will change, and that's just the nature of science. And we may learn more and more about these certain bacterial species and things like that, and we may be able to prescribe specific probiotics to help certain health conditions. But where we are in the current status of the literature is there's just so many bacteria, and we don't know all what they do yet. So it's really hard to make certain prescriptions of certain bacteria.
I love that. So what you're modeling is a healthy dose of skepticism about like any sweeping claims, but also that mentality of impermanence about your current like position, or the current consensus or the current understanding about the science of probiotics and particular conditions. You're open to the idea of like, my mind could change on this. I'm open to being wrong, but right now this is what the evidence points to. I think that's kind of essential for people who want to kind of have a scientific mindset about things. It's not saying this is it and this is the answer and that's the end of the discussion and I'm never going to change my mind. That doesn't lead to inquisitive critical thinking, questioning things, doing experiments. Like that's not a very scientific mindset.
Yeah, and I think that some people can really lose that in science, and then that's when things start going wrong, and that's when you start having bad research. And when you go into, and when you have a hypothesis and you feel like you have to prove it correctly and you have to be right, and you always have to be right, and everything, it has to be right forever. It's not, you can't approach science that way, because our technology is just improving daily. We're able to look at new metabolites. We're able to look at, sequence things genetically more in detail. our science has come so far just in the past 10 years. And so what we even knew 10 years ago is not true today, just because we're able to better understand things more. And so I just assume that what we know now will be vastly different from what we know in 10 years. And so you have to be willing to accept that you're not always right. And then that's what science is about. It's just about, it's not about finding like the one answer in the end, because we wouldn't be doing science if that was the case. Science would be done. There wouldn't be a field, because we would just say we knew it all.
Right.
But it's evolving, and it's important to kind of just have that mindset.
From a practical, like personal perspective, it can feel confusing when you feel like science is always changing, especially about nutrition. It can feel frustrating because it can feel like one day people are saying, don't eat eggs, and then the next day people are saying, eat eggs, they're so great, eat as many as you want, right? So for people, that's just an example. But for the layperson who's witnessing science being portrayed in the media or whatever, it can feel like, oh, maybe I just shouldn't trust science because it's always changing and nobody knows what they're talking about and they're always contradicting themselves, so I'm just not even going to listen to science. What's your reaction to that, and what would be your advice for someone who feels that way?
So number one is we have a lot of blame to put on the media for a lot of the things that come out. A lot of times if you go and read the actual studies that the media is talking about, what the media is saying is not necessarily what the study shows. So that's actually even happened to me. My master's research was looking at the effects of grapes. So there were table grapes, looking at the effects of table grape consumption on like metabolic outcomes and inflammation and things like that. And we were studying this in mouse models. And there was a press release that came out that was like, patients saw less inflammation and their liver, like lipids were reduced and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, you called mice patients? Like you're making people think that, I don't know. It's over exaggerating the actual findings. And that was just in a small press release that wasn't even, in the mainstream public. So you just have to, that's one thing that we talk about a lot in the course, is how to navigate the media and things like that. But it's just something you have to really kind of take with a healthy dose of skepticism.
And a big grain of salt, right?
Yes.
No pun intended. Food jokes. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the course that we put together. Talk about what need we think it's hopefully filling for people. And let's kind of give them a brief idea of what we go through in the course.
Sure. So our courses will have 12 lessons, and they cover a variety of different topics, but it's really bridging intuitive eating, health at every size, a weight neutral approach with actually looking at the scientific literature on nutrition. And so we're trying to make it so that you can look at both aspects together. Again, it's not black and white. You can care about nutrition, which is something we really want to kind of drive home. It's fine to have an interest in nutrition. It's fine to want to care about, different, understanding metabolism and things like that. But it's also can be taken too far. So do you want to talk a little more on what you think about the course?
Exactly. Yeah, no, you're doing great. So there's so much of a need to work on that emotional side of like your relationship with food, your approach to it, healing body image, and working through your self-talk, and working on approaching food in a healthier, more positive way. And all of that is totally legit. And that's what I spend a lot of my time doing in session with clients. That's what I've made a previous online course about. This course is really intended to kind of dive into the nutrition science without all the gimmicks that you often see when people talk about, quote, science, where it'll be like, all right, let's talk about gut health. And then let's talk about how gut health can make you lose 20 pounds in 2 days or whatever, right? So like there's always a catch when you're learning about nutrition, especially not in like maybe the college setting, or even sometimes in the college setting, it can turn into like this grand scheme of like, how do you manipulate your body? Let's learn about nutrition so we can figure out how to manipulate it. where really what we're trying to do here is we're trying to just say like, no, like the health at every size, intuitive eating, positive nutrition kind of approach to food, like we're approaching food from that lens and from that perspective, but there's still value in learning about the science of nutrition, also learning about how to navigate the nutrition headlines and media is something we talk about a lot in the course too. How do you survive in our diet culture and stay true to just kind of honoring your body? So this is filling that gap for someone who's really interested in nutrition or someone who's ready for the gentle nutrition side of intuitive eating. If you've already done some of the groundwork with healing your relationship with food and your body and you're ready to learn about nutrition, this is for you. And the cool thing is, and something I'm really proud of, is the fact that, a lot of people are talking about this other side, but not a lot of people are talking about the actual side of nutrition. And I think that the health at every size world is getting some pushback saying you guys don't care about health. You guys don't care about nutrition. You guys aren't trying to help people live healthier lives. You're just whatever, right? There's a lot of kind of pushback there. And really, I feel very passionately that you can be interested in nutrition. You can care about it. Nutrition really does matter, but we need to put it in its proper context. It needs to be at the right timing for people in their own particular journeys. You do need to do your own work of healing your relationship with food a lot of times before diving into this stuff. So this is really good for someone who's already done some of that work. And someone who's ready for that gentle nutrition side, and also someone who has that science mindset and wants to learn more about how to separate fact from fiction with topics like carbohydrate, fat, protein, with topics like metabolism, gut health, exercise. We talk about understanding how nutrition science is actually done in the research setting. So yeah, what did I miss, Jessi? Anything else you'd add?
I just want to add that, caring about nutrition is something that has helped me foster a better love and appreciation for my body, because our bodies are so incredibly cool. And I really think that studying metabolism and nutrition and things like that is really able to help us foster a better appreciation and love for what our bodies do for us on a daily basis. And so that's kind of another aspect we're getting at in the course is showing you just how much your bodies do for you daily, and to really just, help them thrive by giving them adequate nutrients and understanding what those nutrients do in your body. Exactly.
So I talk a lot about nuance, and we talk about that in the course quite a bit too. What do you want to say about how nuance fits into this discussion about nutrition, about health, about science? Where do you see the role of nuance in all of that?
Well, we've kind of hit on this a little bit in kind of every little aspect that we've talked about. So number one is everyone is different. And I've said it before, but what works for someone is not going to work for someone else. And we can apply this into virtually every aspect of life. And we see this even in science. So something that's interesting is one of our models of research are genetically identical mice. These mice are literally like identical twins, and we still see variation in different outcomes between each of those. So it just to show you that even if your genetics are identical, you can have different outcomes. And so that's where kind of a nuance comes in with nutrition and nutrition science, is having that healthy dose of skepticism and being able to realize that what one study shows may not be true for other studies, and it may not be true for your population, and things like that.
That's a really good point, Jessi, about the identical mice and how you see variation even with them.
Yeah,
in a lab setting.
Yeah, in a very tightly controlled lab setting. So
right.
You can only imagine what happens when you're talking about humans who, live in different areas
and have emotions,
different foods every day,
right.
Move around differently, interact with different people, are
have
exposed to
different
environments.
Yeah. Fascinating.
So it's just, that goes to show you, it's hard that's where that just skepticism has to come in. It's hard to read one research study, even if it's in humans, and be able to say, well, they found this, so this must be true for me. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind there.
Yeah. I love that. I would add too that I think we're like just embracing messiness of research, the messiness of how we practically apply our nutrition knowledge, the messiness of how we work on improving our relationship with food, the day-to-day, moment-to-moment fluctuations in our approach and in our thoughts and feelings about this and in our progress of working on this stuff. It's messy. But, if it was all or nothing, if it was all great or all terrible or whatever, maybe life wouldn't be as fun. Maybe we wouldn't appreciate the times when things are going really well. And maybe messiness is actually key to really living a full and happy life.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Totally.
So we talk a lot about how nuance matters in our approach to food and the science of nutrition. You do a really great job of talking through so much of the science in the course that I think people really would benefit from understanding and knowing, especially as it relates to how we avoid the trap we can fall into of getting into this really kind of all or nothing, rigid, obsessive mindset, and also how we fall into the trap of the headlines when it comes to nutrition kind of taking over and leading to a lot of anxiety about food. So that's sort of one of the overarching missions of the course, is to help you feel grounded in your knowledge about nutrition, knowing that you know what you need to know to be able to successfully navigate such a tricky diet culture we live in, and to feel rooted and grounded in good quality science of how your body works, how nutrition works, and how your body doesn't expect perfection. You don't need to be perfect. And by the way, perfect eating doesn't even exist. But to just really know from a PhD and a dietitian, from both of our perspectives. I mean, I kind of bring the practical, you kind of bring the science. We both have practically eat and live, so we both bring that side. And then we talk about, how does this look in real life? So I'm really excited about this course. I'm so happy to be offering it. It's been on the agenda for a long time, and I'm so glad we were able to do that together, Jessi. Is there anything else you would say about anything you'd want people to know about nutrition, or any big aha moments you've had personally in your own experience, or anything you want to say to just kind of wrap things up about this conversation?
So the biggest thing that I think I've learned through my scientific training and nutrition training, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but it's the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And this was like my biggest realization. It's like, as I learned more and more about really detailed mechanisms in the body and metabolism and things like that, the more you realize that how much we don't know about the human body in general, how much is still in that black box and that we can't even see yet. So that's something that was probably my biggest aha moment.
Me too. I agree.
It still hits me daily. And I'm like, even when I'm studying like all these microbes and stuff like that, I'm like, we don't really know like what these things do. Like you can find papers that are like, oh, this microbe is beneficial and it's been related to good outcomes. And that's what I have to go and when I present posters, and I'm like, well, it's been linked to good outcomes, but we don't know. We don't know what this bacteria does. So we just don't know yet. Well,
and that's a really good point, Jessi, because anybody who makes it sound like they do know and they're so like gung-ho, this is the answer. I know everything about nutrition. I have all the answers for you. That's a huge red flag, right?
And they're most likely not in science if they're talking about that.
Right. If they're saying that, that's a big red flag that, yeah, they might have a little element of oversimplification for sure going on, but also a little Dunning-Kruger effect, which is believing that you have all the answers. The people who think that they know everything are usually the people who don't know very much about something, and the people that just say, wow, there's still so much to learn and I don't feel like I don't know anything, are usually the people that know the most about stuff. It's a fascinating little phenomenon that we finally have a name for. Anyway, that's one of those things that we actually teach in the course is like, how do you navigate just the world we live in about nutrition? Because I don't envy people who are untrained in nutrition trying to navigate our world. I feel bad because it's so much, don't you think?
Oh yeah, totally. It can be overwhelming.
So much to deal with. Thanks for sharing that, Jessi. That's such a good way to end our conversation about, talking about gut health and talking about nutrition science and nuance and aha moments. This has all been so great to chat with you. Thanks so much for being here. And just take a minute to talk about how people can keep in touch with you and follow along the last few months of your journey getting your PhD.
Sure. So the biggest place that I post a lot of things is Instagram. And so that's just my name. It's Jessi _ Hoffman, Hoffman. And that's where I post a lot of things mainly regards into like my daily science and all the things that I do that may be cool. I don't know if it's cool for people to see.
It's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool.
I mean, I take some of the things I do for granted daily. And so I've finally gotten to the point where I'm like, maybe I should document this because I'll probably want to look back on this in someday.
Yeah.
Because I'm getting the opportunity to do a lot of different things that most people won't have the opportunity to do.
Yeah, we're talking like white coat, safety glasses, pipettes, centrifuges, like stuff like that. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's cool for people that aren't in science. For people that are in science, they're like, that's my everyday.
Duh, yeah.
Lame. But yeah, you can find me on there, and I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there as well. But yeah, really, I'm open for people to reach out to me on my Instagram. I'm always answering questions. And things like that. So I'm really happy to talk about science anytime. I'm kind of a nerd and I like talking about science. So that's me.
Yay. Thanks so much, Jessi. This was a blast.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me again.